turn to James chapter 5. James chapter 5, we're cruising right along. Just a couple of weeks left in the study of James. I hope it's been beneficial to you. Here's the issue with James. It is incredibly practical. And every page, every chapter, every verse or so seems like it just hits us right upside the head. And this passage we come to at the beginning of chapter 5 is very much that way, because he begins chapter 5, or the way the breakdown is, begins chapter 5 addressing the issue of money, addressing the issue of wealth. And in fact, the subject of money is such a big part of our lives and a source of temptation toward worldliness that Jesus spoke 11 out of the 30 parables about money, about stewardship, about wealth, about riches, about those things. So it's very relevant to who we are and how we live. Now I want to begin with three statements about wealth, if you will, three statements about this subject, and then give you just a big old indictment of a statement. So here's the first three. And these aren't necessarily bad. The first two, not necessarily bad. We live in a society, number one, where it is quite easy to become wealthy compared to the rest of the world. Right? We live in a society where it is quite easy compared to the rest of the world to become wealthy. Number two, we live in a society, and you're not going to have time to write these down, so just, take a picture or listen fast. Number two, we live in a society where accumulating wealth and material possessions is considered an inalienable right. It might not be specifically written out like that in the Bill of Rights or the Constitution, but the American dream, right? And so we say the American dream is for many people, is as much of a right that we claim as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But here's number three, and it's kind of you combine number one, number two, and you get number three. We live in a society that is more focused on accumulating possessions than it is on upholding values and morality. Now that's a tough thing. But here's a greater indictment. It's not just in society that money has impacted our lives in those different ways, but it's also all these things and those three principles to begin with, those three things have impacted the church just as much. So here goes a full screen worth of a statement. I want you to see this and to read this along as I read it. The church was founded by people who sacrificed all they had for what they believed. Now, more people will sacrifice their beliefs and commitment to church in order to accumulate more possessions and or experience more pleasure. That's what you call a truth bomb. And I'll just let it sit out there for a little bit. Just think back to the sacrifices of people when the church was founded. Oh, you can think back to 120 years or so when this church was first founded and the sacrifices made by those people. But I'm thinking bigger than that. Think back to the first century. Think back to those that gave their very lives as the church that Jesus established when he ascended into heaven. As that church was established, believers, gathering places, they sacrificed everything. They sacrificed status. In so many places, they sacrificed wealth, being this topic. So much sacrifice. But now it's almost like it's flipped the other way around, because people so quickly will give up church or whatever their convictions are because they say, well, that's really getting in the way of my job. But if I sell this product, I can make more money. So it'll be okay that I sell that product. It's okay, I know maybe, even though I wouldn't do this, other people do, and it'll help the business to thrive, or it'll help the business survive. And people look at it different ways, and so they sacrifice what they once held as convictions or beliefs because But, it's no big. Church will be there next week. Church isn't going anywhere. Let's take a few weeks off. It's summer. And I'm not saying you should never take time off. Don't hear me say that. But it's so easy to accommodate our pursuit of pleasure. And quite often, what we put on the back burner are those things for which once the church sacrificed, for which once the church put on the front burner. As we look at this difficult subject of wealth, and it's not maybe what some of you think are coming, but it's how we acquire wealth and then how we apply that, how we put that into practice, how we put what we make into use in our lives. It's really important, and it really verifies whether your faith in Jesus is authentic. And it also makes visible how deep your faith is in the Lord. So that whole money thing, it really reveals, it's a good window to our soul. It's a good window to our priorities. It's a good window to the depth of what we say we believe. So look with me in James chapter 5. Either you're interested in this or you've already picked up your phone and looking for some app you can play until the next few minutes are over. But I hope you look with me in James chapter 5. I'm actually going to read verses 1 through 8. It says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and the rust will be a witness against you and will consume your flesh like fire." Woo! And James, he's just laying out there, doesn't he? He said, "It will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you've stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields and which has been withheld by you cries out against you, and the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure. You've fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You've condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you." And then in verse 7 it says, "Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it until he gets the early and late rains. You too be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand." I added on those last two verses because I think it fits within the context of what James is addressing here about wealth, because so much of what is the acquisition and the pursuit of wealth is the get-rich-quick notion. That whatever's coming, I want to get rich, and I want to get rich quick. And so I want to talk to you about the acquisition of wealth. Number one being this: getting rich will not bring security and stability to your life. I hope that's not a surprise to anyone, but possibly you need to reflect on this. Getting rich will not bring security and stability to your life. Yesterday, all day, there probably was not a moment that I did not have my phone with me, because I just knew that one of you had made a flying trip to Illinois and had bought that winning Mega Millions ticket and was going to call me. And you were going to ask this question: "Preacher, should I tithe on my $1.2 billion winnings?" To which some would say, absolutely not. To which I would say, well, the devil's had it long enough, so yes, go ahead. You know, the get-rich-quick thing just captures so many people. We were coming back from this funeral we went to in Waco on Friday. We're driving back through the Dallas area, and it stopped real quick. Jana ran into a store, and I said, well, I'll go fill up the car with gas while you're in there. And I went to 2 different convenience stores, and you couldn't even pull in the parking lot. There's so many cars there. I'm like, why are there so many cars here? I mean, it was just a random weird thing in the middle of the afternoon. There's so many cars at these convenience stores. Then it hit me. They're lined up there buying tickets for this Mega Millions thing. And obviously they didn't win it either because the winning ticket was not bought in Arlington or Fort Worth. Well, here's the issue with the lottery or other forms of gambling, other get-rich-quick things. For you to get rich, a lot of poor, desperate people lost money they couldn't afford to lose. And here's what you need to understand. The fascination of getting rich quick preys on the poor and the desperate. The fascination, this drive, this staying awake at night thinking, oh, I bought this ticket. What if? What will I do with? Will I take the lump sum cash payout or will I take the annuity for? But that drive and that passion, it preys upon the poor who couldn't afford to be buying that ticket to start with, and the desperate. Maybe not destitute, but desperate for something to change in their life. So that's where those things hit that ethical Christian dilemma. Is that something, a practice we should have? Listen, if all your debts are paid and you're going to buy a ticket and you owe no dollar, no penny to anyone, is that something that's okay for you to do? Maybe. But what you're doing then is you're participating in something that's pulling away those earnings or what little money some people have. That's where the issue comes in with get-rich-quick schemes. For somebody to win, a whole lot of other people have lost. And how ethical is it for us as believers to participate and to condone and to support some of those things? So questions that you need to consider. Well, have you ever read about lottery winners that are broke within 2 or 3 years after they win these lump sums, whatever it is? We hear about those stories all the time because that wealth, ill-gotten wealth, quickly earned like that, just goes away so quickly. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 11 said, wealth obtained by fraud dwindles, but the one who gathers by labor increases it. The one who gathers by labor increases it. One paraphrase put it this way. It said, wealth from gambling quickly disappears, but wealth from hard work grows. So if you're a parent or a grandparent and you have children coming along that you are teaching them, you're training them, you're trying to equip them in life, please don't teach them how to make money. Okay? Teach them how to work hard. Don't teach them how to make money, but teach them how to work hard. If they learn how to work hard, they'll always make money. If they learn how to work hard, they'll always find satisfaction. They'll always know how to go to the next step. Maybe if one step ends, teach them to work. Don't teach them to make money, because then the focus is on the wrong thing. And in Scripture, the focus is on being a good steward, using the resources, the things that God's put in our lives to get ahead, to do what's best. And just understand this, because wealth, money, things, possessions can rot. They can decay, and that's what's addressed here to these farmers. These crops, they will rot. Those things will go away. Matthew 6:19 says, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal." This funeral we participated in Waco on Friday morning, the burial was at this historic, and all you Baylor people will appreciate this historic cemetery in Waco called the Oakwood Cemetery. I've been right by it. Seems like a ton of times through the years, but I've never been in any service or entered the grounds of the cemetery. Well, following the service, just so you'll know, 105 is hot whether you're in the shade or not when it's humid. But after the graveside time was over, I'm standing back over on the side talking to the funeral director, and we're just kind of killing some time. And he was talking about this cemetery, because it's got these 150, 200-year-old live oak trees, just kind of a beautiful setting. And we're standing over there. He said, "Oh, yes, a historic cemetery." He said, "There are governors, there are old judges that are buried here." And he started telling me stories. He said, "In fact, there is is somebody buried here in the late 1800s. He's buried sitting upright in a chair because he wanted to be buried sitting upright in a chair with a 6-shooter in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other hand. True story. Supposedly. I mean, look it up. It's there. And I thought, well, that would be the only upright thing in his life or death, apparently, if that's what he was emphasized. But this funeral director started talking about how, oh yeah, you hear these stories about how people are buried, in California and these places, they're buried in their cars. Or they're buried in these giant crates with their wealth or specific possessions because they just want to take those things into eternity. You can't take it with you. You can't take it with you. Those things stop. However wealthy on earth you were, it is over the moment you take your last breath. Say, well, I'm passing it down to others. Well, maybe in some cases that's good. In some cases that'll be honorable. In some cases that's not good. But if your security and your stability is founded in those things, it just won't last. Number 2, the pursuit of wealth and ill-gotten gain can easily become an idol to the recipient. The pursuit of wealth and ill-gotten gain can easily become an idol to the recipient. The Old Testament gives us several examples of people who had great wealth. Abraham. No way you can study about Abraham and not realize he was someone of great wealth in his possessions and land and influence and so forth. David became one of those. Solomon, certainly that was the case in his life. But the landowners being addressed here in James 5 were those that had become rich by unethical means. Now, we don't know if these were specific landowners, specific wealthy people that James that are being addressed, or if this was just a general problem that was apparent in that period of time. I'd say it's probably still apparent in this period of time. So it might have been true specifically. It certainly is true generally in this time as well. And it probably was true in the church then because he's addressing this to the church. And it probably is true in the church now. So either way, James is not saying that money is evil, but he's saying that ill-gotten gain is wrong. 1 Timothy chapter 6, just write this reference down. 1 Timothy 6, 9 through 10, listen to these words. It says, but those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare from many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. Men who pursue that, that's the driving force, and that's what it says when they want to get rich. And then it continues on, and it says, for money is the root of all evil. No, that's not what it says. It says, for the love of money is a root of evil. For the love, for that being our consuming passion, that which we find, in which we find our security, our passion, we almost worship it in a sense that we pursue it or we cling to it, as was the case with these landowners. They clinged to their wealth, not paying the laborers. So it was an unhealthy, and unethical acquisition of wealth. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it, this is 1 Timothy 6:10, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. That's what I was saying at the beginning, is that too many people have now sacrificed what they once thought were their beliefs or their convictions. They've sacrificed those things in pursuit of that wealth, those riches, what they perceive as that security that would come from that acquisition of things. Number 3, too often, the desire to become rich will drive people to compromise their integrity and Christian principles through immoral business products and immoral business practices. Through immoral, unethical, unbiblical products or practices. We could probably all name some immoral products, some things that Christians shouldn't be selling, and some illegal services and illegal or sinful products and services that some people have. But what about immoral business practices? That's when you take a good product, like farming in this example in James 5, but the owner, the landowner, was unethical in the way he dealt with that wealth. Think about a good product. Gasoline, good product. Groceries, really good product. Especially in a few minutes. But in a hurricane, if you decide that you're going to double or triple or quadruple the price of your good product, that's called price gouging. And some of us have seen it. If you've lived along the Gulf Coast or somewhere in hurricane season, every time you see reports of it. How gas prices just overnight will shoot straight up, or whatever, the price of plywood, those kind of things that we see a lot of times like that. So what we find in James is that something like farming is acceptable and common, but these owners were immoral and unethical because they weren't paying their workers. They broke the back of the workers for selfish, dishonest gain. So if you're in business, it would be unbiblical, unethical to break the back of your workers and hoard that money without paying them what they're due. So that's what this is about. That's what this is trying to teach, is that it's not wrong to have wealth. It's not wrong to make money. It's not wrong to make a lot of money. But if the way we acquire that and accumulate that, let it build up, is hoarding and not giving, not being ethical and paying workers and so forth, then that's where it crosses the line. So in some areas it might seem like it's a real gray area. Well, then we have to look at that in our own business, our own personal lives, and see how the acquisition of wealth can be appropriately applied. So a good way to apply this passage and others is to contemplate the biblical principles of wealth and stewardship, and then evaluate the personal practices and application of that. So I want to give you some application questions for application of biblical principles about wealth. Four questions that are good questions, whether you are a young person getting your first little cash mowing yards, or if you're a young adult that have your first actual paying job, a real full-time job, or if you're a young, rising, growing family that all of a sudden you need to learn how to balance your money and funds and so forth, or even if you're in the peak earning time of your career and you're looking at this, okay, what do I do with this now that some of these big things in life are out of the way? What do I do with this wealth? Or maybe you're in retirement and you look at it and you go, okay, how do I manage wealth? Do those biblical principles change at different stages of life? Let me just tell you, no, would be the answer to that. The biblical principles remain the same whatever stage you're in of life. So learn them now, learn them early, and then apply them all the way through. So here are four questions that you can take and evaluate the way you apply wealth. Number one, what motivates my career or life plans? What motivates my career or life plan? What's the driving force? I mean, why do I do what I do? Why do I want to get what I want to get? What's the driving force? What's the motivating factor in wealth or the acquisition or accumulation of wealth? Number two, does my pursuit of wealth harm my health, my family, or others? Does my pursuit of wealth harm myself? Listen, because it can. If you're in a job where there's no stress, I'd be really curious later on to know what that is. They wouldn't call it a job if it was stress-free. Sometimes a volunteering job is stressful. But if Listen, everything brings a measure of stress because stress comes with responsibility. But there's a difference between healthy stress, something that stretches us and teaches us to depend on the Lord, and unhealthy, physically destructive or emotionally destructive type stress. And some people pursue that so much that it becomes unhealthy to them personally, and it also can become unhealthy to their family. I know families that have fallen apart because the father or the mother has pursued wealth and pursued status or acquisition of power or whatever it is so much to the extent that they let their family fall apart in the shadows. So does your pursuit of wealth harm your health, your family, or others? By the way, one other reference to write down here, Proverbs 15:27. Says, a greedy man brings trouble for his family. A greedy man brings trouble for his family, but he who hates bribes will live. Listen, this is a freebie. This is not in my notes, but if this is an issue that you find yourself challenged with or struggled with, just read a chapter of Proverbs every day. Just start that practice of reading a chapter of Proverbs every day, and it will remind you what the Bible teaches about wealth. Number 3, does my pursuit of wealth help or hinder my desire to know Christ more? Does my pursuit of wealth help or hinder my desire to know Christ more? Does it strengthen my walk or does it distract from my walk? Does it give me opportunities to witness, and do I use them? Or do I avoid those opportunities that the Lord puts right there in front of me? If you're working anywhere, the Lord gives you opportunities to be a light for Him. Are your eyes open to those opportunities? Or are you so focused on climbing the ladder, on making the buck, that you're missing out on what God wants to do in your life and through your life to impact people? Because always remember this, people are always more important than product. People are always more important than product, and if we get that flipped around, then we've lost perspective on value, we've lost perspective on stewardship. And number 4, how do I use the money I've earned to further the gospel of Jesus and the purposes of the church? How do I use the money I've earned to further the gospel of Jesus and the purposes of the church? Listen, when wealth is acquired in a God-honoring way, it will more often be applied in a God-honoring way. When wealth is acquired in a God-honoring way, it will more often be applied in a God-honoring way. Back in the early 80s, I met this older couple. It was the church where First Baptist Bremond, where Daniel Ortner, former staff member, his dad was the pastor and still is the pastor. There was an older couple there, never had any children of their own, just faithful, simple people. If you ever met them, they're just normal, just normal people. He was retired from a refinery in southeast Houston, and the lady, his wife, was retired from the Postal Service, and the jobs they had had through the years were not these just grossly rich money-making type jobs, but they were just hard-working, faithful people for a long time. And I remember that one time they decided, they were both up in their 80s, I think, at this time, and decided that they were going to give a significant part of their what they had accumulated in stock to the church, because they said, we don't need it and we don't have anywhere to give it, and the church has a need, and so we're going to give this to the church. And so they did that, and Brother Stan, the pastor, asked him, he said, that's a huge gift. And Mr. Bill Vickery, the man, said, God didn't give me this to get rich. He gave me this to be generous. But, here's the way the Lord works. Within a year after that big amount they had given had already increased back because the stock market unexpectedly shot up. And they were back at that same point again, because you can't outgive God. Because if you bless God, He will bless you. These were simple people. They were not flashy in any way. They were just good, faithful to the Lord, hardworking people that had put biblical principles about wealth and finances and stewardship to work in their lives. And God blessed them over and over and over and over. And because he blessed them, he blessed generations that were not even their own blood, but he blessed generations in ways that they will continue to reap the rewards of. They're both now gone to be with the Lord.